feel free to step up if you have a question. I mean, I could ask one to plants,
So this question's for Jenny, and you talked about discovering your congregation's DNA, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about, that process and, what you discovered and what you did with it.
It's a good question. I wasn't there for that particular process that preceded me, and we have a really wonderful lead pastor who led that when he came, and with the philosophy that discovering your DNA is part of helping you know what you're called to do. You don't want to do something that's outside of the DNA of the church and who they are. But we've had a lot of processes that are around that people are familiar with, like finding a mission statement and developing core values. And the way that we have worked that in is there's like a internal document we have is how we are, who we are. And we've just really worked it instead of it being something that our session did, on a retreat and then it gets buried. We use those words. We have like certain word attributes that we consider really important, like wholehearted and inclusive and rooted. Those words are up on a lot of around our church. We use them all the time. Our mission statement is creating spaces of grace to cultivate hope, healing, and purpose. So that was a great discussion, and from that became the spacious Christianity, this idea of spaces. So then when we have discussions, we ask ourselves, what is spacious in this decision? How does this create more space? We did bring in a consultant to help us do some of that. We brought in Kevin Ford, who works in Washington, D.C., and some of it we've done on our own, but we do have brought in some people to help us have those conversations. And we have a really wonderful communications coordinator who I would say is actually, she's not a person that grew up in church at all, but she worked for Microsoft in their marketing department, and she believes in what we're doing and who we are, and she asks us all the time, how is this spacious? How is this in line with our mission? How are we doing living out what we've intended to do? And so she's bringing some of those skills that she's learned in the business world that we in church sometimes lose track of, and is really the holder of and holds our feet to the fire. So it's just been I think those conversations are really important, but finding ways to really make it live and a part of your ongoing discussion. Yeah, and having systems in place where we're asking that, and so it's been good.
Hi, my name is Greg Bolt. I am from Nebraska City, Nebraska. And I was doing some research when I decided I was going to come to this, and I was checking out First Ben's website, and I noticed that you have a youth collective, and I was wondering if you could talk about what that means and what that is.
Could you talk about that, please? Let me introduce you to Greg Bold, who's one of the founding members of our Bend Youth Collective, along with Ron. So.
Yes, I am that person, but also kind of, and I don't want to be, I'm not on the panel, so I'm not talking, but I want to talk about how you've lived into that collective model in not just the youth, but also the spacious Christianity, and how that has influenced the rest of the church and not just the young people. Or has it? Or how do you see that keeping young people connected through the faith process and into adulthood?
Yeah, I could talk about. Maybe we could tag team it.
Okay.
With our powers combined. So the youth collective really came out of relationship. And that's where we're seeing, we're in the process with Josh and about 4 or 5 other churches of developing one in Southeast Portland. There are 4 or 5 churches in Northeast Portland developing another one, 4 or 5 churches in the Gorge now who are developing one. And these are all ecumenical conversations amongst mainline churches. This is very exciting. So in a lot of ways, I've had to get really clear because we started getting these calls around like, hey, you guys did this thing. What was that really about? And people really just wanted best practices, like what night of the week did you meet, and did that make it work? The partnership, and I think what we got really clear about, or what I've gotten clear about, is that it's really the relationships and the stories, and really getting clear about why are we doing this, and what do we as mainline and in our context progressive churches, what does that mean when we're a public presence in a community? And what can that do? And I think that as we got really clear in partnership with the community and listening to the stories, we began to partner with organizations and people who are out in the community and not just ask the members of our church, what do you want for your youth program? I think that comes out of like a, eco-feminist theology kind of thought, is actually if you work with the most marginalized or vulnerable populations, it actually works for the people at the center too. But what was amazing is that our youth group ended up becoming about 1/3 Latino students who are mostly undocumented. And now they're in relationship with our churches. Their families didn't decide to become members at First Presbyterian, but we were in relationship. And Central Oregon, for example, is not this liberal town. I mean, we're the only red district in the entire state. But what happened is we were able to take stands as churches around immigrant rights, around how policing was done, around how coordination between the local sheriff's department and ICE was done, because our church communities were now in relationship with these stories. These kids were a part of our youth group. It wasn't just a political talking point about, hey, should we be for immigration reform or not? This is Jose, this is Belin, this is Mario, this is Oscar. These are real faces and real stories. And I think that's one of the biggest ways that it ended up impacting our church DNA, is we were able to get really clear about what are we about here? We're about standing with these kids during the storm and stress of adolescence. And it's about connecting with not just kids on the margins, but really the margins of our own stories too. And we really tried to flip the, well, I'll just say it, organizations that are like Young Life, when it was founded, which is a collaborative, their methodology was literally find the most popular kid on campus, get them on your team, and everyone else will fall in line. That's not in their materials today, so for those of you who work with Young Life, I get that. But it's an important image because really what we were trying to do is the opposite of that. And to really say, who are the most vulnerable people, and to do that analysis, and then to do that listening of who are those folks. And build relationships, and then see what comes out of that. And that's really what our processes are looking. We're saying in all these communities where youth collectives are starting, we're joking, we're going slow to go fast. So we're building these partnerships, and what will weather the storm of figuring out how do we partner together is being really clear about why we're doing it. Because when it gets frustrating, we're going to be really clear about, here's what this means for this community and who it's going to impact.
Right, let me just add as an addendum to that, Greg is gone and Ron is gone from Bend, so then the question is, how do you make this sustainable? Because because Ron and Greg and then Donna, who's from the Trinity Episcopal Church, worked really well together, so how do we continue to move forward? So we now have our own youth director at First Pres, Nativity, Lutheran, and the Methodist Church share a youth director, so they pay into his salary. And then we have other churches that are interested. And so this last year, we've come up with really clear things based on this is how we do ministry. This is what's important to us around justice and theology, so that when other churches want to join, it's really clear, and we're getting clear on what the what the financial realities are of being a part of that as well. And so having the church structures have to have conversations about money and sharing personnel is like makes partnership really real. But I also think the doing this with the kids, because everyone can do it for the kids, right, has then led the way for us to consider other partnerships, and it's strengthened the partnerships between the churches. And so like a year and a half ago, Ron and I invited, and our friend Stephen invited other pastors in that collaboration to lead a Black Lives Matter march. And so we marched from the Presbyterian church to the Methodist church. And in this very white town, it was a really amazing thing to see how this group of clergy came together. We sent out a letter together, letter to the editor about the importance of this, and we gathered together to make a really important statement in our. So we talk a lot about how can we use our relationship to really for justice in this town and to highlight the issues that we feel are important. So.
I'm Cheryl Galen. I'm transitional leader of the Presbytery of Elizabeth in New Jersey. I want to pick up on a couple of the concepts that are being talked about right now. The first one is the why. I'd like to hear some more from others on the panel about the why that drives these innovative forms of ministry that you've been creating. And the second piece is the partnership piece. And something that I've been playing with is how to get the right people on the bus. To join with you in addressing your why. So anybody who wants to, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your why and about the people that you have invited to come on the bus with you.
Well, I was just talking during the break with someone about the people part of that question. I can tell you, I can point to the conversation with someone on the backyard at a picnic that started this whole traction for we could do something that's bigger and broader together. And so it starts with a conversation. And when there's energy in that conversation, then other people get included in the conversation. So the why kind of goes back before that. I mean, what we did is we were kind of saying, well, our church is getting smaller. What are we going to do? It's kind of empty. So we invited Glencoe School to have school here, which is an elementary school just 2 blocks down. And that's a long story, but they ended up having a week of summer camp here through their PTA, and it was in conversations with those people that those are community people that we began to have the broader conversation of what could we really do with this much space. So the why started with, well, we don't have a lot. This is getting kind of empty. And what do we do about that? And then just conversations. That's my...
So I feel like I'm a little bit, have a little bit different outreach group. I really do feel like sort of the college campus is our mission field. And it's about reaching out to young adults. Some of them have not had an experience in a life of faith, and they have questions, and often they find us later in their college career because they're looking for a place where they're allowed to ask those questions without being told that the questions mean that they're going to hell. And so when they discover that we're the kind of place where you can ask questions, they come. So there's that group. And then there's also the group that I feel pretty passionately about too. They're the folks who were raised in the church. And then I feel like, for the most part, our denomination at least does a good job of loving on kids. And then we send them off to college. And it's kind of like we say, gosh, we hope you see you again someday after you have babies. And it's not happening. And I feel like, I heard someone explain it once, that it's as though we do a really good job, and then we take them up to the edge of a cliff, and we say, we'll see you on the other side. But what we forget to tell them is, oh yeah, there's a bridge up the way. And we're kind of called to be that bridge in campus ministry, to help them get to the part where they know what it's like to go to church by themselves for the first time ever. A lot of times. Maybe none of their friends care about this stuff. And mom and dad aren't there anymore. And it's scary to try churches out by yourself. It's scary to try to find a community of faith, especially when you walk in, you're the only person under 60. And it's scary to figure out if that's comfortable for you, or if it's okay with you in order to go with the friends that you have who are interested in that to a place where you don't agree with what they're preaching. And so that's the why for me, is being that bridge and helping them understand that you do have to take responsibility for your own life of faith. And you do have to figure that out. But we're here to walk alongside you. And P.S., God is there with you too. You're not all alone. And the who part is a little tricky. When we started this whole journey was right when not just our presbytery, but the whole denomination was ending funding for campus ministry. And that was a little disheartening. We were getting all excited about this new thing, and it was like, oh, this is going away, that's going away, that's going away. We're like, maybe we should pray about this again. I'm not really sure what's happening here. But the other side of that is there's all sorts of new, exciting stuff happening. And while as a whole our presbytery is no longer able financially to support us the way they have in the past, they did work with us creatively to figure out how to use our property well. And the churches and individuals in the presbytery who understand, not all of them do, that their money that's going to Presbyterian giving in our presbytery is no longer coming to us, are happy to find ways to support us one-on-one. And guess what? That builds closer relationships with those people. It's a little scary right now because things are tight, but we're seeing relationships growing. And I think that it's important for these young people to know that all these folks who are strangers care about them that much. So I think it's important in that way.
I just had a quick piece about the partnership part of that. I think one of the things that's been something that I've learned in doing all of these new partnerships and ecumenical partnerships is that what's beautiful, there's a completely different posture when I get a phone call from a group of churches that are like, hey, we'd really love to talk with you about youth collective stuff or whatever the collaborative idea is, and they're ecumenical. They're coming to the table with a different posture. When it's a group of Lutheran churches who want to ask the question, there's so much baggage at the table that they can never move forward. And it's really hard to get clear about why we're doing this, because preservation often ends up being the main motivator. And so what I found is what's beautiful about not being like synod staff, which may be different, I don't know what a transitional presbytery person is, but I don't have to invite everybody to the table. Like, there's enough low-hanging fruit out there of people who are ready to go and move forward on things. And I think we waste a lot of time trying to bring or convince or argue our way into a relationship to partner on something because we're in the same geographic area, and we should. I think we need to stop shitting on ourselves and move forward in new relationship, and we actually might find some really beautiful things out of that.
There's a question in here somewhere, but I first need to disclose my DNA. You see, in 1919, an English carpenter took a train across the U.S., and the track only went to Montana, and he hiked down through a valley and back up and got on something else and somehow got to Portland. And bought a house in southeast Portland, but he was a Methodist man and would take a taxi over to First Methodist and sang in their choir for 75 years. But this carpenter didn't have enough money to take all of his kids with him, so Mizpah Presbyterian Church was just down the road, so he sent them there. And that's how I ended up becoming a lifelong Presbyterian. I rode this train. I've read my Bible. I haven't taken any divinity courses. I'm just a layman, but I don't see program written anywhere in the Bible. And the thought the thought expressed by the Lutheran we let in the door, I don't know how that happened, about having the humility to ask, where is God working now already? And can we come alongside that? I lost my job at Intel 2 years ago to the day. I am homeless. I am penniless. I shovel horse stalls in alfalfa, which if you think Bend is white, you should see what alfalfa looks like, and you know what I mean. I mean, it's just ranchers out there. But online, I found a community on, of all places, Instagram, of people who are writers who are pouring their souls out. And I've connected with some of those people and started dialogues. A Muslim woman born of an Irish mother in London trying to figure out what life is about. A Chinese orphan baby who's now 18 and in fact is flying into Eugene as we speak to sing in a choir, but she was born without a right forearm, so her mother in Beijing gave her up for adoption. But she's been raised by blonde Scandinavian Wisconsin farmers and thought she was ugly. To connect her via WeChat with kids in China and understand that every 16-year-old girl worries about if she's pretty enough, why everybody else can get the boys to talk to her, and why her parents are so hard on her for being on the internet so much instead of studying for a test. I mean, these are the people that are hurting. And I ended up at Mount Tabor years ago because my son's neighbor boy said, hey, I go down here, why don't you come? And so I followed my kid into Mount Tabor, and this was before Carly showed up. And the DNA in churches is real, and some of it's deadly from past sins, from past holy wars. And how do we move past all of that? What I found is being a broken, vulnerable person in this millennium is the open door to finally being able to be used by God. And until we get real with that and remember that the only people Jesus condemned was the organized church. Pharisees didn't start out bad. They wanted to be holy. Well, what do you do? Well, let's write down some rules. And you shouldn't do it either. And you see it going on in the election cycle. And you see it going on the way the Christian name is. So I don't even use that name anymore. I'm aligned with my red-haired, freckle-faced brother from Beaverton and his Japanese wife who are in Syria right now, helping to fund people who are trying to save gay and lesbian Muslims from being killed by both sides. To find where is God working now, and let's go help them. So I guess to make this a question and not just a plant, you know, how can we do more of that? We get caught up in confessional. I walked by Koinonia House in the 70s and walked by very quickly because I found that I could talk to people in my architecture course up in the studio over a beer about the divine, but if I took them to what the old house was, I wouldn't see them again. And I had a community of architecture students, so I tried to figure out what to do in the community. I'm not saying things worked. I mean, look, I'm going to be 60 this year. I'm divorced, you know, on the edge of my rope. But I'm finding ways to connect to people, and it doesn't cost anything to be kind. And kindness can sometimes open that door to those conversations and those relationships and make issues real being face to face. I spent the summer of 2014 in China and found out the Chinese people really don't care about their central government and overthrowing it and embracing democracy. They want to live and they want to love and be mindful and grateful and kind and have their kids do better than they did. We used to call that the American dream. I'm not so much into the consumer side of that, and now I'm just on my soapbox. But how can we get back to what the carpenter did, life to life? Not programs, not alternative things. It's stumbling along in the dark, and I think that in our weakness, God will perfect His power if we let Him. So, how can we apply that in your opinions? And I'll go find you in Bend if Mom will let me borrow the car.
Come have a beer Sunday.
There you go. Right. Thank you for sharing. We need to gather in ways that allow us to share the stories that you're talking about, or like the kids that are dealing with immigration issues or whatever. We need to actually not sit behind tables like this and sit around perhaps in a circle, or be more like actually form ourselves more in a community, as opposed to the person speaking God's word up front to the people so that they can receive it. We need to actually live into being the priesthood of believers together and truly believe that God is in our midst, that God yearns for us to be like God's Son, that actually we can do this, that we're not only called to this, but empowered by this. And it's through picking up our cross, that's the suffering piece, that I'm, not that I suck, but that I'm awful. I struggle with things, or whatever it might be, that I'm open and honest, that I'm vulnerable. And we need to provide spaces where we can do that.
And even more than that, individually, as followers of Jesus, we need to cultivate the spiritual discipline of curiosity. And it is a spiritual discipline. We are so, and I am as guilty of this as the next person, okay, of living in my head and not actually seeing the person that's over there and being curious about who they are. And if we could develop the spiritual discipline of curiosity, people would feel noticed. And that's an individual thing, and every single one of us can do that. You don't have to be a pastor. You don't have to be a program leader. You don't have to be a Christian. To develop the spiritual discipline of curiosity, and we've gotten our focus a little off. So that's my 2 bits.
I can follow up with that because although I consider myself more spiritual than religious, my mom is Jewish, and I was somewhat raised that way, a little bit. So the odd person out at the table, maybe. But what I find super compelling is that, if you open your doors and you open the sense of community, like, people will show up and people will fill that space. And people will do amazing things if given that opportunity. And when I think about 5 years ago, when I was first coming to Tabor Space, to this church, and we started that group, the Community Inspired Professionals, the why of it was because we were really like wanting to support each other, to help each other during a time that was difficult. And then also to give back to a larger community, which wound up largely being this church. And if you go next door after this meeting, Muir Hall, which is where we met, it's actually, I think, the only room that has like a fresh coat of paint and has been, beautified, because the people that were part of this group, like, from their heart, were like, what can we do to give back to this community that's really supporting us? And, that's what I think can happen if you truly start to open doors to new possibility and new people. Yeah, it can happen, and it can actually happen easily, and it can happen with a lot of positive energy because it's authentic. It's coming from a true heart space, and when we approach the world from that place, like, amazing, amazing things can happen. So, thanks.
Can I ask a question? So I'll try to phrase this as a question like my friend did. I also am a layperson working in the private sector, and what I'm hearing from each of you are what I consider to be leadership. When I listen to people, and when they talk about doing things right, they're not leaders. When they talk about doing the right thing, then they're leaders. So I'm hearing each of you say, I'm passionate about doing the right thing. And one of the things I challenge, what's your name? The fellow from Ron alluded to it. Oregon is number 50 in the United States. We're the worst state in the United States for food scarcity for children. And historically, the church, Christians, and food and feeding children, I'm dismayed. I haven't heard any of you talk about that. And I challenge you, if you are doing something with it, I'd say, please tell me. If you're not doing something, I challenge you to do something about it, because if you want to do the right thing and you want to get old people like me on board giving you money, feeding children is something I can get behind. So.
Yeah, we'll have to get you connected to Michael. Michael, Nat, there he is. He helps us with the Portland Food Project, which feeds children in schools. So, talk to Michael back there.
Can I ask you a quick question? Are you Presbyterian? Yes. So I just want you to know, in the Presbyterian Church, we don't have lay people. We have the priesthood of all believers. And I just want all of you to know that, as has been said more than once, you're all empowered to do this. I think even in our moderator elections the other night, we kept hearing, oh, I'm just an elder, I'm not a pastor. There is no just. It's the priesthood of all believers. So I want you to feel empowered, if nothing else, tonight.
Yeah, there you go.
Because we all have our perspective.
Yeah.
In ways that we feel perhaps called. And so we need voices like yours to say, this is an important issue.
Yeah.
And so we need your leadership to which you just did and showed, to carve another piece.
All right, I'm going to be empowered and not ask a question, but offer some resources to the woman asked a question who's from New Jersey. Is she still here? Yeah, because and Ron and I talked about, one-on-one conversations and community organizing. And I mean, we see in our congregation that although we've had training about doing one-on-one conversations, it's still very difficult. But I've come to the point where one-on-one conversations are the answer, what's the question? Whatever it is you need to do, you need to have one-on-one conversations. And so I would offer some resources if that's unfamiliar to you. If there is an Industrial Areas Foundation affiliate in your area, which I know that there are some in the New York, New Jersey area and other places in New Jersey, they do training in doing one-on-one conversations.
MACG is our local one. Metropolitan Association for the Common Good.
The center in Baltimore, which is a mission center, part of the Baltimore Presbytery, but anybody can use that. They work with congregations to figure out how to engage with their communities, and the key piece of that is doing one-on-one conversations. And I would also offer a book that we're studying right now, Walking with Nehemiah, by Reverend Joe Daniels, who's a Methodist pastor in Washington, D.C., and he has a section in there. It really starts with having one-on-one conversations. So there's some resources that help get you introduced to that.
Can I make a comment? Okay. I am a member of this church. I'm not in charge of anything, but I used to be at an evangelical church that I used to go to years ago. Back in the 90s, there was a book that was very popular called The Conspiracy of Kindness. Our church had a great deal of trouble. It was an evangelical, non-denominational church. Had a great deal of trouble with outreach. So we got a hold of this book, and I was just on fire for this. I thought, this is what we can do. We can go out, we can show people God's love, and they're all going to come to our church, and we're going to grow our church, and we're going to do and do and do. You're going to wash windshields. We're going to take people's groceries to their car. We're going to do all these different things. And we did those things for a while. But we never stopped to listen to any of these people. And see, what you said, it just hit me so I thought, now I know what I've been doing wrong all these years. But I mean, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. At least I found it out now. But what I'm saying is, and I was talking to Paul earlier, I tend to be a fixer of things. And that's not what it's about. So this whole evening for me has been an aha moment. And I'm just thank you. Because maybe God finally says, hey, I'm going to talk to you through these people. So I really appreciate that. It gives me a great deal of food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer just the complexity of leadership right now, I think is, in church leadership requires a particular understandings. And if you look at it, the organizational cycle of organizations, they go through this time of establishing, and then they go up, and then they go down. And a lot of our churches are going down, or they're just about to peak out. And there's an option to start again, getting into that innovative space and going again. But the kind of leadership that can allow both of those things to happen at the same time, to both honor this building and this space and the congregation that gathers here on a Sunday morning, and to honor what's being born in this space at the same time, I think is really particular, and all of us who are church leaders in many ways are called to facilitate that space. And so sometimes, someone will say we have this new idea, does this mean this has to end? And sometimes I say yes, and sometimes I say no, let's let it keep going, and let's start something else alongside of it, and let that grow and see how they inform each other. And I kind of hear that in the last couple of questions where there's a sense of, I really want to honor the passion of what's emerging, and I also want to honor where we've come from. And sometimes, and usually it's just really messy and doesn't, and it feels really chaotic. But to honor both of those things, and I think that's, in this time of the church's life, is what we're called to do.
Yes. Yeah.
Or many of us are called to do.
I'm the sound tech here at Mount Tabor, and a couple of weeks ago we had some really good special music on Sunday morning, and I was having a conversation with the musicians that collaborated to put this together. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was that these musicians all had a humble spirit. They weren't trying to be in charge of what they were doing. They were working together in humility, and it was absolutely a fantastic thing that happened. And I think that's something to keep in mind, that we all tend to have our little egos, and we know what we're doing, and we're going to do it our way, and we have to listen to other people in humbleness, and that opens up the opportunities for collaboration that can be phenomenal.
Right. Thanks. Yeah.
Last one.
Ooh, thanks, Josh. I'm going to ask a broadly ecumenical question. This is not a Presbyterian question. It's not even a Christian question. I'm a pastor. I work at camp.
Yes.
And I have 2 part-time jobs with no benefits. What I'm asking is, if spirituality is a river, and all of us are the streams that have been trickling into this for the last 2,000 years, what's next in your perspective?
Do we have another hour?
Yeah, really. Wow.
Just 2,000. I was going to say 5,000. Sorry.
No, it's pretty good.
We'll do
back 5,000 years because really it's
Answer this question like Ron likes to ask questions in one word.
Hyphenated, though.
2 words. God knows. it's really about the only answer to that question. And so God knows what's next. From our perspective, it's to get in the river.
Yeah, I would say from the work that I'm doing with Community Wealth and Revive, this idea of unconditional belonging, because, yeah, spirituality is a river, and I think like energy attracts like energy, and when people are engaged again, and if you do open those doors and let what wants to happen begin to happen, then I think that's where the future is. I think that people need to come together in new ways, and to do that we need to make it an inclusive party.
As we're going down the line. I would say I don't know. We regularly say at First Press that we know that this is, whatever this form is that we're attached to is probably dying. So how do we live within that, acknowledging that and also being open to what's new? So being unattached is important. And I think the way we make it through that is the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, maybe a little bit of self-control. Huh?
No fair, that's lectionary next Sunday.
Yeah, okay. So I don't preach from the lectionaries. Anyway, so I just think it's, it goes back to relationships. It goes back to listening. It goes back to being open. It goes back to being vulnerable. So it's not a matter of what's next, but who we are and how we are in the middle of it. And I think our faith has a lot to say about that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a beautiful image, and I mean, my one word hyphenated answer would be, I can't wait to find out. But I think especially when, even like panels like this are convened, oftentimes it's people who are selling a book, or people who have a quick fix-it idea. We need to do this kind of church or this kind of thing, or here's the solution. And I think a lot of what that done has clogged up the river from flowing, or has put constraints on it. And so I really think that the only thing that's going to, help, take the plunger and get the thing flowing again is the stories from people. And that is going to be what takes us into the future. And helps it to flow. And I think as leaders, whether we be lay or clergy, and the blurriness of everything in between, we get to be a part of dismantling the ways that the river has been commodified and sold back to us. And that's why I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, I don't know that we know what it will look like. I have a friend whose theory is that we might get to be like Moses and at least glimpse the promised land. We're not going to get to go there in terms of what's next. But the thing that I hear again and again, and we've heard it again and again tonight, and that I think is true, is relationships. Jesus didn't say go build a church. Jesus said love one another and love God. And it's about relationships. It's about caring for one another. And trying to live that out. I've heard a lot tonight about relationships, about listening, about caring, about humility, about not being afraid to fail. Just keep trying, because we don't know what's next. You just got to keep trying and see what works, and maybe what works for a season. I think that's another, like you were saying, not getting too attached. I think we've gotten so used to, here's the 5-step plan, and this is going to fix everything, and then we just keep doing the same thing again and again and again, and that's not helpful either. It stagnates. Stagnant water is not so great either. But I think the relationships in terms of outreach, the other part that we've talked about, or at least alluded to, is the relationships with one another and within our communities. And I think maybe one of the reasons we're not up here trying to sort of promote our own plan is that not a one of us would take solo credit for anything we've talked about tonight, I don't think. There are huge groups of people behind all of these outreaches, and Yeah, the river is full.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if I have anything really to add, but just, I don't know. I've been introduced to looking at how Jesus and the disciples lived, as far as we can kind of ascertain that, and living as spending time with the Father, Creator, whatever we want to call God, spending time in community with one another, devoted to one another, committed to one another, and then together being sent out to serve, to heal, to proclaim God's beautiful, wonderful kingdom is already here. It's sitting around a table and eating. It's whatever heaven is actually really like as a community, and trying to live that way as best we can here and now.
I got one last thing I want to say, and then you said no more.
Can you hold it to after? I just want to close because of the time. So I just want to say thank you, of course, to all of our panelists. And thank you for all of you that stayed through for this and were here. I'm thankful that you were all part of this. I want to thank Tabor Space and Mount Tabor Pres for hosting us and allowing us to have this happen. I just want to say I feel honored to know all of you. So thank you.